Hello and welcome to the Legal Edition. I'm your host, Attorney Mary Kay Elloian. Our show topic today is Sectarianism and Schism in the Middle East, what it is and how it came to be. Our guest is Attorney Sarian. He has served as a senior rule of law advisor on behalf of the U.S. State Department in Iraq and Afghanistan, and as an international legal counsel for the European Commission, the EU. Let's welcome Attorney Sarian. Welcome to the Legal Edition. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mary Kay. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we know that you've been working you've been working out in the Middle East, and you've been talking to me about the schism in the Middle East and the sectarianism. Can you explain to the audience what is sectarianism and the schism in the Middle East?
Well, the sectarianism started a long time ago in the Middle East. It's actually related, of course, to Islam, the predominant religion of the Middle East. And this started, of course, when the Prophet Muhammad started a movement from paganism into Islam in the Middle East around the 7th century AD. And after his death, and at around 632 AD, they wanted, the Muslim population of the Middle East wanted to have a caliphate, someone to become the next caliph, the next representative of Islam, the head of Islam. And the word caliph is the Arabic word for it, as the one who takes over as the leader of the Islamic religion. So what happened was schism began at that point in time when they decided to bring in a caliph to take over. Some of the Muslim population decided that it ought to be a bloodline. Mm-hmm. Others decided otherwise, that anyone with better knowledge or a follower and with close relationships with the Prophet, that would be the best possible person to be promoted to that position.
Now, the Sunnis are the ones that do believe in that orthodox,
yes,
traditional thought of the Prophet Muhammad.
Traditional, only the ones who decided that the bloodline would be the ones who should be the next caliph are the Shias. The Sunnis were opposed to that. Today they're the majority in Islam. We have approximately 1.6 billion members of the Islamic religion, and of which 85% are Sunnis. And the remaining, of course, they are Shias with some splinters off of it. What has happened, of course, is that during the Caliphate, the first Caliph became the will of the Sunnis, and he was Abu Bakr. He took over, and the Shias did not accept that fact. Ali was the son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad. And he had two sons, Hassan and Hussein. And according to the Shias, he was the one, the true contender to for that position, to become the Prophet's caliph.
And for people who are listening, could you define caliph and the schism for them so that they have a better understanding?
The caliph is the one who takes over the position of the Prophet. Mm-hmm. Okay. And the schism is between, of course, the Shias and the Sunnis. At the time, they were not known as Shias and Sunnis. They were only known the ones who believed that the next caliph ought to be someone from the bloodline of Muhammad. Okay. And the rest, of course, did not agree with them. And they are today the Sunnis who do not agree. And they're prevalent. They're more prevalent in Islam. They're 85% of the Muslims, as I mentioned earlier. And they have been in power throughout the Middle East and the rest of the world. It extends all the way to the Pacific region. Many countries such as Indonesia and even China and the Philippines. There are pockets of Islam, mostly Sunnis. And that's where the schism began. That's the origin of the schism. And it lasted, it remained dormant off and on, because at one point, the actual act that caused the schism was the assassination of Ali and his son Hussein.
So that's when it began.
That's yes, at that point in time in 680 AD. And as they were traveling, Ali and his cohorts through Karbala, which is located in today's Iraq. It's a city. It's a holy city for the Shia. And they were surrounded and attacked by the Sunni powers. And they were massacred. They were assassinated, technically. And from that day on, the Shias and the Sunnis began their own. That's why the schism began, but they also began to battle each other, and the decline between the two took over for generations on to come. There were pockets and periods of calm, but the disagreement and the opposition always remained intact until recently, of course.
Yes, bring us up to modern day.
Yeah. Modern day, of course, power remained for centuries in the hands of the Sunnis. And what happened, that there were politically in the Middle East, the 2 or 3 things that happened at the same time that brought forth all this animosity and renewed all these passionate animosity between them, between the Sunnis and the Shias. And the wars, of course, in the Middle East that we're witnessing today are not necessarily religious in any sense, but that the religion is being used as a vehicle for political struggle, political power.
So you're saying that the religion in and of itself is not the real divide here?
It's not the real divide, but it's the excuse, it's the call to duty for on both sides, Shias and Sunnis, to fight each other, it's basically for political power. And this is what happened. The Shias throughout the Middle East have, because they were the minority, they were disenfranchised from power. The oil power, the oil wealth, etc. So most of it is hinged on economic power, where some of these, a lot of the countries had corrupt leaders, and the money filtered through the elite, and they were mostly Sunnis, and the Shias could not participate in that distribution of wealth.
So they were excluded to some degree.
They were excluded and disenfranchised. Eventually, the Middle East went through, so originally this was one cause that they felt always alienated. The second thing that occurred in the 50s and 60s, that the Arab countries experimented with nationalism and Marxism. A lot of the leaders became, and the countries turned Marxist and, mostly socialists, etc. And as we know, for instance, Saddam Hussein's power was a Ba'athist, and Syria today is still Ba'athist. They're opposing parties, opposing types of Ba'athism. Ba'athism is a socialist concept. It's a Marxist in essence.
And how is the Marxism differ from the socialism? Is there much?
No, Marxism is
actually degree.
Yeah. No, Marxism is the entire concept from which socialism and ultimately communism are derived. Mm-hmm. It's the ideological concept. It's the doctrine. Mm-hmm. And there are various, levels of socialism all the way to the extreme left of communism. So the Arabs went through a period, a few decades swinging between nationalism and socialism, but none of those vehicles really worked to the benefit of the majority of the Shias and the Sunnis, some of the poorer, disenfranchised. So and the third point was in the course of events, was in the 1970s was the Iranian Revolution. The Iranian Revolution, of course, Iran, the audience ought to know, is that Iran is the mother of all Shiism. The majority of Shias are concentrated in Iran.
And we have a chart here, I think, that
Right.
that depicts that.
Sure.
If you could,
Well, I can show the audience, perhaps,
yes.
if this is...
So could you explain that?
Yes. What happens is that there's a crescent today, as you look at it, what we call it the Shia crescent. If you look at Iran as the major stronghold of Shiism, the Shia power, and it goes through Iraq. The majority of Iraqis are actually Shia, approximately 16 million out of a 26 million population. The rest are Kurds and Sunni Arabs. And then you cross that border on the west of Iraq. It's Syria. The border is Syria. Syria, unlike Iraq, is a minority Shia. It's a sect of Shiism. It's called Alawites. They are the Alawites, and the president of Syria is an Alawite. Although they're a minority, they still are Baathists by ideology, political ideology, and they control the country. And now, of course, we can discuss this at another time as to why all this violence is occurring in the Middle East and how Syria is involved in all of this. And of course, the fourth country is Lebanon. Lebanon has Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a party, some countries consider it a terrorist organization, others do not. They are Shias, and they all follow the leadership of Iran. So if you look at it on the map of the Middle East, you will see that there is a crescent sort of it going from Iran to Iraq to Syria to Lebanon to the Mediterranean. That crescent is a sort of an annoyance for the rest of the Sunni Muslims, the Sunni Muslim world in the Middle East. In the north is Turkey, which is 99%, 97% Sunni Muslims, and the south, of course, Jordan and Saudi Arabia and all the Emirates and Yemen, and those are all basically Sunnis. And there are pockets of Shias in all of these countries. Today you hear about Yemen, for instance. Yemen has a minority Shia population, the Houthis. And so going back to what I said earlier, the Iranian Revolution was a successful revolution where theocracy took over, where the mullahs took over the country from the Shah. And to this day, they rule the nation as a theocratic regime with believing in Shia power. And it became, because of its large population and its history as an empire in the past, Persian Empire, they are contenders to become a regional power. And that threatens Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia being across the Gulf is a Sunni country.
And recently Saudi Arabia just executed a cleric.
Yes.
And from my understanding, that has caused a considerable amount of upheaval.
Yes, but see, they beheaded a Shia cleric, and that was something that, of course, offended the Shia world, including Iran. Of course, Iran. And this is tit for tat. It's been going on. There's a lot of proxy wars and battles that are going on in the Middle East between Shias and Sunnis. But as I said, it's all about political power. It's a political power struggle in the Middle East. But using these schisms and these sectarianism as a tool.
So ultimately, the ultimate goal, I would understand, for because of this divide, is who's ultimately going to take power and control, and take control of the resources in the area. I would assume that is the ultimate motivation here.
Power is in the Middle East is it's something that is in the minds of all these regimes. They want to be in control. and obviously economic power leads to political power. So there's a lot of oil. Of course, we know that the United States has always been pro-Saudi Arabia because of our dependence on Saudi oil, and we try to defend that regime, the kingdom itself, against any hegemony, Iranian hegemony, etc. But if Iranians take power in the Middle East, they control, as it is right now, because we haven't discussed this, but because of most people know this, because of the Iraq War, Saddam Hussein was a Sunni. When we toppled him, the Shias took over. We facilitated that. So Shiaism, yes, we facilitated that, and so the Shias are in control currently since the fall of Saddam in Iraq, and they are pro-Iran because they're Shias like the Iranians. And
so what do you foresee happening here? I mean, we have ISIS, and whether is that an outgrowth of all this?
Oh, yes, it is. But their Shias, of course, is to be known that they are strictly Sunnis, but they are extreme form of Sunni Islam. They're not the prevalent, Islamic. They do not represent the Sunni Islam sect, but they are. Many of the Sunnis and the clerics, they want to disassociate themselves from ISIS because it is beyond religion. It's something that is it's too violent. It's an extremist type of.
So it doesn't
power.
represent the majority of either Sunnis or Shias.
No, the Sunnis, I should say, because they are totally against Shiism. They actually decapitate, kill Shias, even Sunnis, part of the ones who do not follow them, and Christians, of course, in the Middle East, and Yazidis, and what have you. Anyone that doesn't belong to strictly the ISIS or ISIL ideology, if you want to label it as so, it's the Salafi type of Salafi, and I don't want to confuse people because in Islam there are doctrines, there are different types of denominations, such as in Christianity, for instance, we have Catholics, we have Protestants, we have Orthodox. Muslims have that also. Shias, the main two sects are Shias and Sunnis, but amongst both of these sects, there are subsects, schools of thought. Schools of thought, I would rather say. And there are at least 5 or 6 in Sunnis, but there is one that is very extremist, and is.
What is that?
It's the Wahhabi, and there's a lot of controversy going back and forth, but the Wahhabism is centered in Saudi Arabia. It's a school of thought that started by someone by the name of Abdul Wahhab, who was really very extremely ultra-conservative form of Islam.
In what country do they mostly inhabit?
Well, there are no specific countries. It's an ideology. If you want to follow it, you accept it. If you're a Sunni, you have to be a Sunni to believe in it, of course. But they are the subcategories of the Sunni denomination. They would be Wahhabi, Salafist Wahhabis, who are takfiri, where very extremist ideology, ultra-conservative, and the ISIS group belongs to that.
I see.
Yeah.
Now, when you were out in Iraq and you were working out there, did you have to deal with these issues specifically, or did you work in conjunction with others that were trying to stem the tide of some of the disharmony out there?
Yes, directly and indirectly in some instances, because I worked with the Iraqi government on behalf of the State Department and European Union at one time. My last assignment was with the European Union to work within it to strengthen the credibility of the criminal justice system and enhance the rule of law. This is basically what I was doing throughout all of my stays in Iraq and Afghanistan at one point, but mostly in Iraq.
And how were they receptive? Were the Iraqis receptive?
Many were receptive, but the ones who were corrupt, because they were corrupt, within any regime, and especially in the Middle East and in Iraq, there is corruption. Some were corrupt, others were not, and there was an internal struggle, internal, battle going on within the government. Some are more patriotic and wish to do good for the country, and others who do not care for it, and they only think about how they can fill their pockets. And so the difficulty was, you work with people, with some of the internal security people I worked with for counterterrorism. I worked with generals, mostly generals who are the leaders and decision makers. And within the criminal justice, I worked with the judges, with the courts, with the Supreme Court of Iraq. And it's a variation of different types of positions I had. And it was, in some instances, difficult because you're speaking to someone and try to make, to establish and ensure progress within their system. It's capacity development of their system within the government, mostly in the criminal justice system and the national security system, and as all the organizational types of the institutions within these organizations. And it was difficult because you meet someone who wants to do well, but his associate is corrupt. So we had to work around this, and sometimes it worked, sometimes it did not.
Yeah, it sounds like it could be, it's very frustrating and could have multiple outcomes.
Very frustrating.
And very frustrating for U.S. people that are over there trying to...
Yes, many of us from the U.S. and Europeans are there too.
Help them get on the right foot. Now, what are your feelings in our final minutes? What are your feelings about Syria and what's going on over there?
Well, it's a tragedy, of course. It's a major tragedy, and I think we have to stem the progress of ISIS. ISIS is a major problem. If it's not nipped in the bud, we will have, it's going to metastasize like cancer. It's a very dangerous organization. As it is, of course, we tend to forget that we started out for years with the Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was an extremist organization as it is. Bin Laden was the head of it. Of course, he was. We took him out. But ISIS is an offshoot of that organization that disagreed with Al-Qaeda's system of operational systems, how they wanted to proceed, and they became much more violent. It started out with their leader Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi, who was killed by our forces a few years ago. In Iraq, but his successor now is al-Baghdadi, the gentleman that we call Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who is an Iraqi himself. So he started this movement, and he created a schism between himself, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda, because he didn't want to accept Al-Qaeda's leadership, and wanted to exert more violent, extremist type of approach to his operations. And I feel that in Syria and Iraq, ultimately we will be, I think, with the help of our with the U.S. forces, we will be able to contain them, if not destroy them. But unfortunately, in the Middle East, something else may pop up in the future if the conditions in the Middle East are not changed, because they are a manifestation of the problems that exist among the people in the Middle East. And this started out with the Sykes-Picot arrangement, where these borders did not exist after World War I. And in the Middle East, between, let's say, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, so
these borders are the modern-day artifice.
Right, and they are artificial, so to speak. And France and Great Britain at the time, they were the ones who drew these lines and these borders between these countries, which were not quite natural, didn't sit well with who's who, and who belongs to which, and the Shia Sunnis, and which tribes, and who consider themselves Arabs, etc., and Kurds, and what have
Christians.
And Christians.
Many Christians, from what I understand, out in Syria as well.
And Lebanon, Syria, and northern Iraq, northern Iraq. So if the conditions on the ground and the economic distribution of wealth is not taken care of, and these borders are not something is not going to be done about them to fix the problem, this may continue in the future and have different manifestations, different types of issues that may come up, again, may turn into violence. Because this has to be settled at one point in time. And who's to do it? I guess the international community has to get involved, including the United States.
No one country can do this.
No one country. They have to do it themselves. Too large a problem. It's
and it's endemic. It sounds like it's endemic over the centuries.
Yes, and of course it goes back, and the mechanism that's being used again is the sectarianism, the Shias against Sunnis, etc., being used as a tool in order for a power struggle and to be able to become a regional power, primarily between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but of course Turkey is another contender to all this because it's as large in population and size and power as Iran is. These are the two. Iran is Shia, and it's a big power in the Middle East, and Sunni power is Turkey.
And we have that graphic
and that's
there. In the final moments, do you have any feeling either way, positive, negative, about the Iran deal that was just hammered out?
No, I think this is as politics as usual. I think we have to find a way to approach Iran in such a way that we bring it to within our sphere of influence. And we have to do everything, in my opinion, that's the way I think about it. And that we need to somehow get them to change their attitude towards us and towards the West. And this deal may or may not be helpful, because what I believe that eventually Iran is going to become a nuclear power. I hope not, but that's the way it seems like it will evolve into that, because they have the technology. It's only a matter of whether we have to keep an eye on them, and not to evolve to that point where they can actually have a bomb, a nuclear bomb. So
it sounds like something we have our work cut out for us, the U.S. and the rest of the world. We have to keep our vigilance with regards to Iran and all these other Middle Eastern hot spots.
Yes, because lately we have pivoted towards China. We're watching what China is doing. Our government has decided to do that, but I think we are cautious and not to get our eyes off of the Middle East, because the Middle East could be a very dangerous place if not contained. And there are many issues still that are unresolved and ought to be resolved.
Oh, well, I want to thank you for being here. Thank you for enlightening us.
Thank you.
And perhaps we can discuss this further in depth in another time.
Hopefully.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I want to thank our guest, Sarian, for sharing his insights and opinions on sectarianism and schism in the Middle East. And I want to thank our viewers for tuning in. For more information on today's topic and our guests, please visit The Legal Edition online at thelegaledition.com. And as always, this information is for general educational purposes. It is not to be construed or relied as legal, business, or professional advice. And please consult a qualified practitioner as to your legal, business, or professional needs. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time on The Legal Edition.